It was the analysis of some of our legal experts and friends that Stormy Daniels performed better on cross. So are they not strong at cross? Do we have a pattern here yet?
Well, I think it's a combination of sort of on direct for Stormy Daniels. I think you have to remember it's a high-profile matter for both the prosecutor. It's not every day that you have this searing spotlight. For Stormy Daniels, it's not every day that not only are you testifying under oath in a criminal case, but a searing spotlight. So you can understand why direct, which should be sort of the easiest, can be rocky for the witness and the prosecutor. I've not been in with this amount of scrutiny, but I can tell you, I used to say a high-profile case brings out every flaw you have. And if you have a lot like me, that's a lot to bring out. And, and for a witness, just think about, Stormy Daniels, who might have, may not be proud of everything in her life. And certainly for Michael Cohen, who has to admit a lot, it's difficult. So there's a reason direct can sometimes be stilted. But I think Stormy Daniels on cross was, I'm sure Susan Neckles isn't going to like hearing this, but I think Susan Neckles humanized her and allowed her to speak, and she was more comfortable. And I think that happens when you have another day to sort of relax. I think that Michael Cohen, having heard him live on, I thought he was sort of remarkably good. I also think people should, stop saying, oh, he's a different person. Lawrence O'Donnell made this point. When you're in court under oath, you are a different person. It is a different circumstance. Yeah. You act differently. I've been a witness sometimes. You take that oath so seriously. You are careful. People have different parts of themselves.
It's like getting pulled over for secondary screening when your whole group is there. Yeah. Right? Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. No, sir. No, I didn't.
I will say also that Todd Blanchett's an interesting choice to have him do this. Just because it's your first time doesn't mean you'll be bad at it. But, he is not an experienced defense lawyer. He's an experienced prosecutor. So it's a very different art form. I think so far, with a witness who's got so much baggage, and as you've just heard, there's so many ways to attack him. You're not hearing what you usually get from a defense lawyer, which is clear, telegraphed themes to a jury. And so I was frankly shocked that he started the way he did. I totally agree, Christy, beyond thin-skinned, rude. It was clearly going to get an objection. I am not surprised that you do not want to have your first line of argument be sustained by the judge. Yeah. Jurors tend to like judges and sort of follow their lead. So that was just not great. And there's so many better ways to deal with it. I also feel like just because a lot of this stuff deals with the special counsel office, and I know personally, there were things that I thought were misleading. And I don't mean that the defense lawyer shouldn't have been asking it, but I was like, oh, come on. They tried to say, didn't Donald Trump sort of, and during the Russia investigation, you were told not to speak to Donald Trump, as if somehow you've been shunned, and that Donald Trump couldn't possibly have told you through indirectly what to say when you testified in front of Congress. That is not how it works. In these kind of cases, everyone is lawyered up. The fact that you're told that means you're inside the tent, not outside the tent.
Right.
And the suggestion that this means that Donald Trump had no way of communicating to him, and we saw
he was tweeting at him the day before and after.
Yes, and you don't think lawyers talk? And again, I'm not saying that they're saying lie, but I mean, they can communicate to what they think is a truthful story as to what should be said. And so I just thought there was some fast and loose with the facts.
Well, and that's a fact problem. I mean, there seems to be, I just want to be really blunt about what's happening right now. There is clearly a performance issue that Judge Merchan has noted with objections that have been sustained. It's been described by reporters in the room on the Times Live blog as erratic line of questioning. Yeah. I mean, if he bombs at the performance level, where does that leave you with Trump historically?
Well, usually get the boot as the lawyer. I mean, how many lawyers has Donald Trump gone through? I don't mean to.
But Trump doesn't. I mean, Trump didn't care about where you went to law school. He wants you to look the. It just feels like this may be a moment.
That's why he lost the decision the Alina Habba, or he lost the civil fraud trial, yet Alina Habba performed just, in his eyes, how a lawyer should perform on his behalf. And he was there. And who was there sitting in the second row today? Alina Habba. Not there arguing in his defense, but sitting there as a witness and a supporter.
I felt like there was some channeling of Donald Trump at the beginning, because one of the first things we get out is he's a liar and a folder. Or a flipper. Donald also doesn't like folders, flippers, liar. But that was one of the first things that came out, was that he's a leaker to the media, and these are all things that Donald Trump is very focused on.
And these are not things that Trump is. I guess my point is, what are you handing me? You read it. What do you got? What do you got? So
I don't read next to you.
This is happening right now. We should keep an eye on what's happening right now. I am not a lawyer, and I wasn't in the room, but I am a student of Donald Trump. Right. And when someone is viewed to have bombed in some way at a performance level, he doesn't care if you're the smartest lawyer who's ever breathed in air. And so I think this may be a tenuous day. I'm going to peek over at conservative media to see what they say.
Two things. Number one, it's too late to get rid of his lawyers. The person that is doing the cross-examination is the one that is doing the cross-examination at this point. The second part is, being inside of that courthouse here today, usually I've been outside here getting the notes from our team, and Sue and Andrew were like, you've got to go bear witness to this. And I'm glad that I did, because we come back to the eyes being shut. For 2 minutes at a time, he'd have his eyes shut this morning. And then he'd open them quickly, mention something to his attorney, but then go back to his eyes shut. And, I don't know whether he's sleeping or not. But what was taking me aback was that it was defiance of the process, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting.
There's a gag order placed on him. He can't go and stand up and speak out in his own defense in that courtroom unless he takes the stand himself. For him, keeping his eyes shut, almost in a way of disregarding it, I don't care about these proceedings, with the jury right there, was his act of defiance.
It really does feel that way. We were talking about this in lunch, and I've come down on it, having seen him do it every day. There's no other, it's not like it's just one day this happened.
Right.
It is every day for 80 to 90% of the court proceedings. He has his eyes closed. He occasionally will nod off, but that's not what's going on. He has his eyes closed, and I think it is an act of defiance.
80, 90% of the time.
He's sending a message, and the jury's picking up on something there, but he doesn't care.
It's so interesting. Right. And what's happening right now is something we'll keep an eye on. I want to ask you about the final sort of chunk of the narrative on direct that was this morning. I mean, some old characters, Jeff Sessions. I mean, I had a million new questions about when Sessions recuses himself from all. We went back and looked at it. I covered it as and believed it to be Sessions recusing himself from the Russia question. If you go back and watch the video, he says I'm recusing myself from all campaign-related things. Is there what Cohen testifies to today, again, under oath, is that Sessions was going to take care of Pecker. That is not Russia-related. That is the cover-up.
Right, and he says that Donald Trump specifically told him that Sessions would have his back.
It's incredible.
That was a direct line. Essentially, Donald Trump saying, we're going to get into the White House. Don't worry about any of this. The Justice Department is going to be on our side. You're taken care of here. And if I may, when we're talking about the closing there of the direct, Michael Cohen, to Andrew's point about the human side of this, right? All of us have different personalities. At 8 a.m. may be different than 8 p.m. Saturday Vaughn may be different than Monday Vaughn, okay?
Tell us more.
TikTok Vaughn may be different than going to the Opera Vaughn, okay? And with Michael Cohen, I think that's the reality. He was talking about being on TikTok, but then what you saw in there was somebody that felt like, to me, he pled guilty to those federal charges just yesterday and was being sentenced. When he was explaining, looking eye to eye with those jurors, of what he pleaded guilty to in being in prison for more than a year, you were hearing a man who was leaving his wife and his child behind. That was the human that in that moment, and I believe a real human, that came out. And that is what the line that he delivered there, quote, I regret doing things for him that I should not have. Lying, bullying people in order to effectuate the goal. It sounded like a regretful man, somebody who at least that moment in time was that human. All the other Michaels could very well be true, but in that moment, that is who the jury heard.
Well, and that's the Michael that was a piece of the crime. I mean, that's the Michael that the jury's going to have to believe on those questions.
I agree. And I think also it's wrong for people to be confusing, is he believable about things he experienced and conversations he's had, meetings he's had, why things were happening, and comparing that to, is he credible about his own internal motivations now about sort of being honest with himself about can he fully admit I did something wrong in every situation? Those are very different things. And you don't have to believe that he is like completely internalized like who he is now, and that he is like he knows he should feel sorry, whether he really, really feels sorry or he knows that's where he needs to be. It's a really different attribute about a person. And it's funny because this is where, having dealt with cooperators, and I think defense lawyers deal with this all the time when you have witnesses, and at that point, it's their clients. And those are just very different things, and I think people sort of confuse the two. This is just, like, in terms of his own emotions about how he feels now and whether he's regretful or not, is just not the issue.
Right. Whether he's a fully reformed man is interesting, and it'll be on the minds, I'm sure, of the jurors. They'll wonder that. But in terms of being a credible witness to the criminal scheme that he and Alan Weisselberg put down on paper and walked into Trump's office, that's a different question the jurors are going to have to answer. I want to ask you.